882 6PR. This is Perth Tonight with Chris Ilsley.
Indeed, it's not unfair to suggest that personal expression, especially nowadays, especially when people are a bit younger, it's part of the identity. You know, you decide to do something, and even in the way you dress, the way you wear your hair, the kind of jewellery you may or may not wear, as the case may be, it's all part of you saying, hi, this is me. Some people, of course, it could mean piercings, and let's face it, some of the piercings you look at, you go, are you guys serious? What about those ones with big holes in the ears and stuff like that? The dirty great thing that looks like a giant bull ring through your nose and stuff like that. Nonetheless, it's somebody saying, this is me. Whether you or I like it, I suppose, becomes almost immaterial. We're also talking about unusual hairstyles and, indeed, tattoos. Now, I have to admit, I'm not a fan of tattoos. I'll put it out there. I've never been a fan of tattoos. I suppose my dislike of tattoos comes from the fact that they're permanent. Even if you have piercings, I mean, if you've got 101 piercings in places, including that we don't even want to mention, you take out whatever it is, it closes over. No big deal. You decide you don't like the hairstyle, you go to the hairdresser and get a haircut, it's all good. You can change all of these things. Tattoos, not so much. Yes, I know there are removal services, but there are not so much. But more and more people have got tattoos. And in some cases, you'd argue, so no big deal. There might even be some occasions when you see someone with tattoos and it kind of makes them seem authentic. But we recently had a decision by the Fair Work Ombudsman that it's not illegal for employers to say that workers can't have tattoos. Now, in some respects, I have to say I've got some sympathy with this. For example, if you were running a doctor's surgery or a dentist's surgery, an accountant's office, an architect's office, a lawyer's office, and you walked in, the receptionist had a giant sleeve tattoo up her arm, would that really be in keeping with the atmosphere of the office? I'd argue it probably wouldn't, and wouldn't look so flash. I mean, if you walked into a building firm and had the same thing, you probably wouldn't blink. Is there a bit of stereotyping there? Yeah, probably. But then it's like when you walk into a building firm and everyone's wearing shirts and overalls and they kind of look like they're tradies. You expect it. You wouldn't walk into a doctor's surgery and expect the doctor to look like he'd just been working on his BMW. That kind of thing. But of course, I suppose we've got these competing things. People saying, well, okay, I've got the right to do what I want to do, express myself the way I want to express myself. And on the other side of the coin, somebody would say, well, okay, if you want to work in this area, in this role, there are certain guidelines. Mark Pearce joins us on the program. Mark's a recruitment blogger. And there's no doubt that the world is changing. Some would argue not for the better. Some would argue that it's just simply changing. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Mate, what do you reckon about this? You're somebody who's got some experience with people and the expectations that employers have. One thing I've always believed, you can make things legal or illegal, but they don't change the way that people think. For example, it might be illegal to have sex discrimination, but if you've got a pub across the road from where a whole bunch of blokes are working, and you decide that you want sexy-looking 21-year-old barmaids who are going to attract the blokes from across the road to come in and buy you beer, sure, you and I might apply for the job and they might go through the motions, but it doesn't alter the fact that deep down in their head they're saying, I want a couple of smoking hot babes because they're going to attract our primary customers.
Interesting observation. Yeah, I think with the, you mentioned about tattoos here, I think for me, I think it's down to employers actually having their own policies as far as dress and workplace appearances are concerned. And I think where employees have to face customers or clients, physical appearance is an important factor, and rightly so. I think you're face of that company. I think many employers have policies that don't allow visible tattoos, and depending on the employer's industry, and I think the type of job as well, i.e. if there's lots of interaction with customers, I think that does make sense.
I suppose it depends too. Let's say, for example, you're running a shop. If you don't mind, I'm only going to use a brand name here because I think it kind of fits. A shop that's designed to attract lots of young people. I'm thinking of a shop like City Beach. Bearing in mind the kind of customers, their target market, the demographics they want to come in and buy their trendy clothes, I don't know that tattoos would be such a big deal because actually people having tattoos there would probably just look like everyone else. So the people working in the stores, to the customers, the primary customers anyway, they'd kind of look like people that they associate with generally, and you could probably argue in that instance that they blend in nicely and they're really representative of their customers.
Yeah, look, I'd agree with you as well. I mean, I in my local cafe, I get served with a guy in there, and his arms are full of tattoos. He's got sleeve work, and to me, I don't blink twice at that. But I think, you mentioned before, if I guess it's the type of, or the corporate type of organisation, a bank manager, for example, I wouldn't expect to go in and see my bank manager and he had an armful of tattoos. that probably would make you blink twice. But I think you're right. I guess it's the type of the customers that they're trying to attract. And I think the article I read recently was the Virgin and Emirates, the girl had to have a tattoo removed.
Yeah, well, she had a tattoo of an ankle, which was about on her ankle. It was an anchor, about the size of a 10-cent piece. Now, I've got to say, as tattoos go, I wouldn't have called that fairly intrusive, and I wouldn't have thought that was a big deal. Obviously, they did, which suggests to me that they must have a fairly stringent policy that says no tattoos. So the fact that we were talking about a very discreet anchor, which I would argue many people would never notice anyway because it was immediately adjacent to her ankle. But nonetheless, obviously they have a policy that they decide that they're going to invoke no matter what, and that was clearly the case. They said, obviously their policy was no tattoos, and that was it. They were going to enforce it, regardless of the fact that we were talking about a very, very small one.
Yes, yeah, that's true as well, yeah. I think it's one of those as well, isn't it? I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've got a few tattoos myself, and in my line of work, working in recruitment, I go out and see a lot of clients, but what I chose to have my tattoos in places where I could actually cover them up. Because I know in my line of work, I go out and see a lot of clients. I guess within the corporate arena, if I have tattoos showing, for me, I don't know, I just see it as for me, it's common sense. I have tattoos done and I have them in places where I can have them covered.
But you see, that shows to me anyway that you had a clear understanding that you were going to deal with people where you would say, well, okay, I can see that the tattoos are possibly not appropriate, so therefore you've made a decision that, yes, you want the tattoos, so you're going to keep them in a position where you can easily cover them up. Now, that to me makes a lot of sense. But I wonder how many people do, especially when you get people, and let's be honest, a lot of people who make a decision to have things like tattoos do so in their late teens, when they're 18, 19, that kind of stuff. And there's a certain amount of the rebellious streak in them. There's a certain amount of well, this is how I'm going to make a statement that I'm an individual and I can do something for me. I would question whether years down the track they're going to be happy with that decision, because let's face it, we all did things at 18 that we regret. But nonetheless, it's probably not unrealistic to say that they could be harming their employment prospects without realising it. For example, if you have a ridiculous hairstyle, like I said, you can change your hairstyle. If you've got piercings and you had piercings through your nose and what have you, you could say, well, okay, I'm going to take them out and it'll close over. But tattoos tend to be a little bit more permanent, despite the fact there are some removal services. I've had a look at those for an article I wrote in the past, and whilst they're good, they still leave some scarring. And this to me has always been the big thing. It comes on two fronts. One, you make a decision that perhaps unlike any other fashion decision you make in your youth, sticks with you. And the second thing is that people do it without putting forward consideration to say, well, how is this going to fit in the line of work that I may want to pursue down the track?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think, if I was going to give anyone any advice, I've got two daughters, and I say I've got tattoos myself. My daughters say to me, Dad, I want to get some tattoos done. The best bit of advice I would give them is to, look, fine, I wouldn't stand in the way, but have them done in places where you could actually have them covered up, because in future years to come, if you do decide to go and work in a bank or, in the corporate world, to coin a phrase, then, people may see that as, you've got tattoos, and it may change their perception. Which, rightly or wrongly, that happens.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I suppose one of the problems, like I said before, that we run into is that in some areas these things can be deemed as inappropriate. It's like, I suppose, if you look at it this way, it's like dressing. If you decide on the weekend that you're going to dress however you want, and it may well be quite, for want of a better term, outlandish, that's all well and good, and that's no problem. But obviously you're not going to dress like that when you go to work, and I think sometimes people are forgetting this. And they're also forgetting, too, that many of the people who are the employers are also themselves products of a different generation. And often they'll look at these things, and I'll quite happily confess I'm one of those people, and say, gee, I don't really like this. I mean, I am not a fan of tattoos, and I'll go one step further and say especially on women.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from. I think you talk about generations there as well, and I think one thing employees do have to consider, and we look at a number of Gen Zs and millennials now coming into the workplace, a high percentage of them have tattoos. So I think, employers at some stage further down the line will perhaps need to review this, and the challenge for them moving forward is how to balance employees' individual rights to self-expression with how those clients satisfy their customers.
Yeah, I suppose it comes down to your right to self-expression versus my right to say, well, I want you to reflect our customers. The other thing I think that's unfortunate that's probably never taken place in this debate is the fact that, like a lot of things, I see tattoos as being a fashion accessory. And like all fashion accessories, I suspect at some point in the future they're going to go out of fashion. And that may well present some interesting challenges for people in the future.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I actually thought of tattoos going out of fashion. I mean, you mentioned before people have tattoos done when they're 18, 19. I think I had my first one done when I was 17, 18. Personally, I never regretted it. And the old adage is, well, what happens when you're old and wrinkly? Well, I get old and wrinkly, but I've still got tattoos. And I think I don't know, will they go out of fashion? Possibly.
Well, I think everything does. I mean, certainly when I was a young fella, tattoos, there weren't many people who had tattoos. They were quite rare, and I suspect that they will retreat from whence they came, and then, like everything else in the wonderful cycle that is fashion, they will come again. Then they will retreat again, then they will come again, just about like anything, you know. I mean, mate, when I grew up, flares were fashionable. Now, who in their right mind would ever wear flares now? Although maybe they're going to come back in fashion, so perhaps I better shut up, you know.
They possibly could be, but it's like music, it reinvents itself, doesn't it?
It certainly does. What would be your message as somebody who's responsible for recruiting, and obviously a sort of person that people will talk to and say, okay, Mark, this is the kind of work I'm looking for, and you would obviously know the kind of employers that are liable to give those people a job. What would be your best advice?
I think, as I've said, if you are, I mean, I have nothing against tattoos. I know a lot of people that I work with have nothing against them. In fact, my employer doesn't really have anything against them, but it's one of those. Again, in my line, it depends on the line of profession you're going into. So if you are going, I guess, into the corporate world, the best bit of advice I would give you is if you're going to get tattoos done, great, have them done, but have them done in areas where you can actually cover them up, whether that's on your arms or your upper torso or your legs. But
you're talking about be discreet.
Yeah, I'd say be discreet, yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks very much for having a chat to us.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure. Mark Pearce is a recruitment blogger. Maybe a little bit of wise advice there.